Did you know there's a new TeaDracula patron?
Now hosting 7 tiers. The rewards can range from exclusive audios
I hope you don't mind that I got up here and sat on the bed with you.
to updates
But hi there, it's nice to see you all.
to voting on new content. From $1 to $50. I'm forever thankful.
See you there. Hi everybody and welcome back to my channel. I really hope you've been enjoying the new LARP content recently, and I'm back today to give you another. Today I'd like to talk about the struggles and the interesting nature of creating your own character backstory. I'm going to give you tips and advice I have learned along the way, and I hope they're helpful for you. Of course, do what you want with your backstory. No one should tell you what to do unless there is games that has specific rules, but if there isn't, please let me help you today in Character Backstory Creation 101. Creating a backstory for your character, especially if it is your first LARP character, can be very daunting. Don't get me wrong, when I first started I found it extremely difficult. My first character went up through about 3 versions of who they were before I settled on someone. It can feel difficult when you're given a certain world to fit into and you have to think of how you fit into that world. But hopefully together today we'll make that more clear. I'm going to be using some examples, so make sure when I'm talking along with this you think about a world you've been struggling to create for, or you just have fun and listen along. In LARP there are many things with backstories that I have learned along the way, so let's start with that. I have learned that in many ways some backstories can be weirdly isolating. By that I mean that it can isolate you to one thing about yourself and can stop others from getting involved. It can confuse others and make them not want to join in with you. This isn't entirely your fault, of course. If you have a very interesting and very well written backstory that others aren't wanting to get involved in, you are not the problem. I'm talking about isolating backstories, and let me explain that. There are backstories, for example, that can isolate you in games. Backstories, for example, that only include yourself and why your character is alone. Perhaps there's a reasoning as why you are completely alone and don't want to make friends. That might isolate you. You might make a character who isn't interested in making friends, and in their backstory you make it very clear to people that they don't like anyone. This as well might isolate you. I speak from experience. I have played very antisocial characters in the past. I had very antisocial backstories. Unfortunately, this led to me spending a lot of my game alone. If that's what you like to do though, I highly encourage it. Sometimes playing games and watching from the sidelines is lots of fun. It just personally wasn't for me. Something that can also be isolating is overcomplicated backstories, and I also was a problem person for this. My old Empire character had quite the convoluted backstory. If you knew me or roleplayed with me at the time, you will know what I'm talking about. This was a problem because when we tried to talk to people about it or explain it, they either didn't have the time or stopped caring about halfway through the story. It was interesting up until a point, and then it stopped. People didn't have the time in their day to figure out more about it. They realised we were too overcomplicated and stopped role-playing with us. That's the fault of some of those people as well, but mostly on me for creating something that was far too difficult for the normal person to remember. That doesn't mean you shouldn't create very hard stories for your character. I love when somebody comes up to me and tells me this crazy 10-page backstory, but even I struggle to remember it. So let's build a backstory together. We're first going to start with where your character comes from, and this doesn't have to be as specific as you might think. I'm not actually talking about a city or a town. I'm talking about the vibe of where they grew up, or were created or first awoke if you're playing someone who doesn't have any memories. What did they see around them? Was it a town? Was it people? Was it a loving nature? Was it a hateful nature? What did they see? What would they have smelled? What did they feel? I'm going to go along with this for the backstory for my first ever LARP character, who you might recognise. Colleen Fairfax. When she was little, her first memories consist of musty libraries, a lot of time spent alone. Immediately, that gives her a little bit of a vibe. Was your character raised, do you think, in a castle? Were they in a townhouse? Were they in the woods? Were they none of the above? Do they remember their childhood? Who looked after them, if anyone? Were they left to their own devices, or did the maids of their queen mother and father pick up after them? The vibe of where your character comes from can say a lot about who they will become and how you can build it into their story. But then also, we do have to think of where they came from. Did they grow up in a house, a castle, on the streets, in the woods, on a ship, or in space? And how do they feel about this? Are they a prince that's resentful of their king and queen parents, or are they someone who grew up on the streets and loved it there? Did they remember swinging from trees in their childhood, or floating through space, going to space station to space station? Was their childhood happy or sad? Now, you don't need to know the full extent of their backstory to really think of that. Just pick a vibe for your character. How do you want to roleplay them? Someone who's a little more melancholic, or someone who's a little cheerier? Things that happen in our characters' childhoods can affect a lot of things that happen in their waking life when we play them. Not all the time. Some characters, though, can go through horrible traumas and come out the other side with a smile. But we got to decide if it was happy, sad, or in the middle. For my character, Colleen, she had an in-the-middle childhood. She was raised by maids and people who came running after her as a child, as her father was very busy. Now on to that. Parents. The trope of LARP is that everybody has dead parents. The amount of dead parents you'll hear about at LARP is devastating. But that does not mean you can't do it. You'll be told a lot with things of LARP that you should stay away from cliches. Don't have a damsel in distress. Don't have dead parents. Don't be the lone wolf. I think you should do what you want. If you want to be the lone wolf that has dead parents, do so. I don't think anything should stop you, but again, there's isolation. I personally would always advise against the lone wolf backstory and playing a lone wolf, as that will definitely isolate you, as unfortunately in LARP it can be quite rare for people to seek out things about your character. It's better if you play someone who can be included. But if you want to play a lone wolf and that would make you happy, do so. Did their parents treat them well? Were they happy with their parents or whoever raised them? It could be an aunt, an uncle, their grandparents, friends, maids, nurses, anything. You could be their mentor, it could be their teacher. Or maybe they raised themselves. Or maybe they were raised by rabid wolves. Whatever fits your character's vibe, do so. So, working together, we have a little bit of their backstory ready to go already. With my example again, a neutral childhood and was raised by maids. Put them together and put your own examples together. For me, that already creates a melancholic character, someone who feels slightly abandoned, slightly struggling, and it all comes from those two little points. With every good story, there is a start, a middle, and an end. We've just come up with the start. Let's go on to the middle. This is where things can get really spicy. Not every LARP character needs to have it, but boy do I love a good tragedy. For my own character, her big middle section tragedy was... she was accused of having tuberculosis. That was it. That was a big thing for her, but you have to have your middle section. You have your start. Now what is the thing that has happened that have made them come to this place, do this thing, seek this thing out? When you go to a lot of LARPs, you are usually travelling to a place in that world, and usually the LARP system asks for you to have a reason to be going there. For example, in Empire LARP, you are travelling to a place called Anvil. It is a town where people from every nation convene and basically have a festival and they go to battles together. You need to have a reason to go to that place. And even if you're in a LARP system that doesn't intend to have that, I would suggest keeping that anyway, as it's good for your character to have a motive. What would push your character to go outside their comfort zone, or to stay within it and travel to this place? What are they seeking? Were their parents terribly murdered by that pack of lone wolves and now they're out to get their revenge? Or are they just going to party for the weekend? Either option is a good option. Keep in mind that wherever you're going there for, you will maybe want to seek out in-game. If you tell people that you came to, say, Anvil for a party and you don't go out partying, it might confuse people I see. Of course, do not let your backstory dictate things you do not want to do. By all means, you can play a party animal who doesn't touch a drop of alcohol or goes to any bars. You do not have to, and don't let people tell you that you need to act out your backstory. Backstories are for fun, and that's all. But back to my point, a reason is very important. Why have they come to this place, and why will they go at the end? For Colleen, she had to go to a magical school. She went because her father had abandoned her there. Literally pushed her out the horse-drawn carriage and not come back. That's what pushed her to stay there, because she had no choice. Did you wake up in this place after a drunken stupor and you're not actually sure how you got there? Did your character travel by car, by spaceship, by horse and cart? Did they fly? Are they going because they're duty-bound, because their parents want them to, because they feel like there's something there they can't quite describe? And hopefully this will match up with the middle section. The tragedy, the pinnacle. I'm going to use the word tragedy very loosely. All of my LARP characters, I think 20 or so of them, have all been through a tragedy of some sort in their lifetime, but that doesn't mean they are traumatized by it. In every character's backstory, there is a peak that will be the turning point, that will push them towards something or to travel to that certain place. It is not needed, but I personally think it's a good way to get your first backstory going. And as I said, Colleen's turning point was that she was abandoned and she pushed on to go to the school because she had nowhere else to go. Grew up in a manor house, raised by maids. Eventually, her father, who was clearly absent from what I've said, abandoned her at a school because she was accused of having TB. And she stayed at that school because she had nowhere else to go. In this short amount of time, we've already put together a backstory that has reasoning and a peak. Character peaks can be so fun and can be the driving point of your entire game. I played a character very recently that their peak is that they died. Yeah. One of my other ones is that one of my character's father liked to hunt down lineage people and kill them for funsies. I also have another that was forced to perform in a circus, but that didn't traumatize them, they kind of loved it. But it's still their peak. Every character's peak will be different, and you will find that most everybody has one. Some people walk into games with basically no backstory, they just showed up and liked to be here, but obviously this is a video for people who want to build more of an established backstory. Most people you will meet will have that peak, that turning point or something that put them on the path to be where they are and to be seeking what they are. This works in with the motive. Why are they here? What happened to them in the peak, and how is it still affecting them? Is your character sad? Are they happy? Are they excited? Are they depressed? Are they angry? Do they want to hurt people? Did somebody hurt them? Once you have decided this peak, and I suggest looking into fun media to try and come up with one. For example, I've been watching the TV show Lucifer a lot recently, and I guess his peak is when he was thrown out of heaven. It seems so strange to put it that way, but that's his peak. Or if you're playing as the hero in Fable 2, you get shot out of a window by a Lucian. That is your peak. That is your driving force. I hope that puts it into perspective. I don't think it's a must, but I personally like to have something that drives my character forwards and almost forces them to do what they think is right and to do what they're doing. And it, like I said before, it does not have to be something that traumatized them or scarred them. My character that was forced to perform in a circus, that was their peak, but they continue to perform in circuses because they enjoy it. They don't really care that they were forced once upon a time. So, now that we've got our middle, and our start, and our peak, let's move on to the now. Every backstory usually has a lull point before they hit the game. For example, when it was Colleen, and she stayed in the school because her father abandoned her, she was staying there studying, trying to figure out who her true family was as she had found out she was adopted. That was where the game picked up. So when people would speak to her and ask her what she was doing, I had a small book that I had written many things in preemptively about this family. She had been studying for months. I actually did the same with my old Empire character. She had a very large book of things she had already been researching and studying. Maybe I do too many books. Or maybe, when you start off, Your character taking their first steps onto the field that game, that is their starting point. That is them after their peak, maybe a few days or a couple of hours later, and they're here in game, still reeling from what has happened at their peak, be it good or bad. I have actually met several characters that have walked into game after being just held hostage, covered in mud, dirt and blood, stumbling into fields, struggling to stand, right after their peak, and every time it shocks me and I think it's so good. This obviously might be intimidating to you if you're new, so don't feel like you have to do a big entrance, but if you feel confident enough to do something like that, I'd suggest doing so because everybody loves it. I once did a big peak where I came into game covered in blood and half dead. Next thing I knew, I was in a tent getting my heart stuffed back in my chest and the medics asking if they knew what a pulse felt like. If you don't want to do something like that, have your character been doing something just before the start of the game. And when I say just before, this can be up to a year before, or 10 years. The peak can be at any point, although the more recent it is, I find the more fun it is to talk about. For example, your character has had their peak. Let's say, for example, to go more cliche, even though I don't believe in such a thing, their parents were killed in a brutal attack. For the last 5 years, they've been trying to hunt the person down who killed their parents, and it's brought them to this very site, the place of the game. There you go. There's your peak, and there's your, not resolution, but play out. Also, with backstories, don't feel like you actually need to write a resolution. For my old Empire character, it was open-ended. Her and her people were hunting her father down, but it was basically decided OC that he was going to win one day and they were all going to die. And they did. All 20 of them are gone. For Colleen, her resolution would have been finding her father, but I only ended up playing her once, so there was no resolution. But it was still written. The resolution was still going to exist, and I was playing towards that. Sometimes backstories wrap up. It's not as common, but sometimes there are LARPs that only have limited runs. I'm going to one in 2 weeks that actually has a limited run. And I say 2 weeks by the time I'm recording this. It has altogether, I think, around 14 games, meaning that the backstory I have will eventually have to wrap up, and it will. In explosions, of course, because it's me. But if you're playing an open-ended game, don't feel like you need to have a resolution or to ever wrap up your backstory. Even in games that have ends, don't feel like you need to wrap them up. Sometimes a good open-ended story is great, and it's even better if nobody knows what's coming. From mysterious letters coming from your character's backstory, family and friends, to strange cursed jewellery coming in the mail. However you want to act out your backstory in the actual game, you should definitely do so, and don't be afraid of playing your own NPCs. In many games I have sent myself NPC letters, NPC attacks, NPC weapons. I've even had people I know play said NPCs and kick my ass, I see. It is super fun to actually play out points of your backstory and to really let people let loose in it. Some people will hear your backstory and will truly want to be a part of it and will help you solve mysteries, send letters, fight for you, and you should encourage people to get in on it if you're comfortable with that. And back to Colleen. So, we have a girl that was raised in a manor house by nurses. Her father was very absent. She was raised by them until one day she was accused of having tuberculosis. Nobody knows why, and because of this she was abandoned at a school. She studied there for many years trying to figure out what happened to her father, who mysteriously went missing after she was left there. Her father was found dead, and she never recovered. That's Colleen! And some games have some themes prohibited, such as any kind of abuse. Be aware of that. Remember that backstories are supposed to be fun, and you should never use a backstory to abuse another person or to make them feel bad. Also, there's nothing wrong with OC checking with someone first if the topics you're about to go over with them are okay with them, and this can be as little as alcohol use. Remember, LARP is fun. Keep it safe for yourself, keep it safe for others. Protect baby LARPers and have fun even in your 100th game. I hope this was helpful today, my fellow LARP friends. Until we meet again.